Peyton Manning pass was intercepted by Dre Kirkpatrick and returned 30 yards for a touchdown.
Did some good things there in the third quarter, gave ourselves a chance, and had the lead there in the fourth, and then turning over there at the end for the interception for the touchdown that put them up 2 scores. So that's definitely a throw you can't make in that situation.
Cincinnati needs to beat Pittsburgh next Sunday to win the AFC North. Conference champions will square off in only 3 bowl games, the 2 college football playoff semifinals, and in tonight's Boca Raton Bowl. Conference USA champ Marshall meets MAC champ Northern Illinois, 6 o'clock Eastern Time on ESPN TV and radio. Yahoo Sports is reporting that Michigan State defensive coordinator Pat Narduzzi is the leading candidate to become the new coach at Pitt. Cincinnati basketball coach Mick Cronin will miss tonight's game against Wagner as he continues to deal with a brain aneurysm.
Wake up to a warm, toasty Black Forest ham, egg white, and cheese from Subway. Get it freshly made the way you say with all of your favorite veggies and toasted to perfection on flatbread. Subway, build your better breakfast.
Portions of the Sports Fix brought to you by Signs and Ship, the official printing source of the Sports Fix. Locations in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Florida. Find out more at signsandship.com.
Hey, Cleveland, I just want to wish everybody from the bottom of my heart a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from yours truly, Daniel Booby Gibson of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Welcome back to the Sports Fix, live across the Sports Fix Radio Network. J-Rock back with you, rolling on as we continue the special holiday best-of edition of the Sports Fix. This week focusing on some of the most eclectic talkers, I like that term, some of the best voices in Cleveland sports history. Yesterday, Dan Coughlin. Today, the legendary voice of the Cleveland Indians. We're bringing that audio to you. Keep the conversation rolling. Let me know, how are you feeling about this? Facebook.com/TheSportsFix. Tweet with us at TheSportsFixCLE. And don't forget, if you're feeling in the 90s mood now, if that groundswell is welling up in your gut, then don't go anywhere when we're done, because after Hammy, we've got another Indians Hall of Famer from the 90s, Carlos Baerga, on this show. Yeah. It's like that. Christmas present for the Sports Fix Indians fans. Let's get right back into it. I'm going to shut up. Take you right back to Tom Hamilton, voice of the Cleveland Indians. So now we're bridging into the area, and this is where you began the book, Glory Days in Tribetown with Terry Pluto. Before we talk any more about the Indians, about you and Terry getting together there. I remember when I talked to Joe Tate when he put out his autobiography and he teamed up with Terry, and he said Terry is the only person I would have teamed up with here. I love Terry's work. I've always said he's one of my favorite, not just local sports authors, but just sports authors in general. And how did it come together that you two teamed up to do this book? Did he reach out to you? Did you reach out to him? Or did somebody else put you two together to create Glory Days in Tribetown?
No, Terry reached out to me, and I've known Terry for quite some time, and there was a trust factor, much like Joe had with Terry. I felt the same way. I knew there would be no hidden agenda. I knew that it was not going to be a book that you were just trying to dig up dirt on people and try to write a shock value type book. That wasn't the case, and so Terry, described what he had in mind, and the good news was I didn't have to do any of the writing. He was going to do all the hard work, and he just wanted to basically interview me over the course of what ended up being about a year and a half to 2 years, and try to get my thoughts and memories from certain events, players, whatnot, and just kind of have a look back on what was a great era of Indians baseball, and really make it be more of a celebration of that period, rather than what some people might want when they write a book, and that is let's see how scandalous it can be. That was never Terry's intention, and so because of that, I was certainly on board.
And you know what? You mentioned celebrated time period. That's clearly, we talk about it all the time. That is the in my opinion, unless you go back to, obviously back in the day when they were competing for World Series, we're talking 40s and 50s. And I mean, other than that, that was it. To this day, that's the one all the Tribe fans come back to when they get mad at the team today. The word 90s comes out in a matter of a couple of sentences. That is the throwback, because it was the perfect storm. I know Terry's been on the show a couple of times in the past, but he's mentioned no end, and many of us have the perfect storm of not only the great park, but the Indians, the Browns, the whole situation around that, how that came together, and really how important it was. Also, the loss of the Browns for that, but the town it truly, you call it.
Yeah, I've always I take a little exception to. People always say, well, the Browns left. Well, guess what, folks? The Browns had nothing to do with the fact the Indians were selling out. They were selling out in 95, and the Browns were still very much in town. And while with the Browns leaving after the 95 season, more focus was on the Indians. Whether the Browns would have been here or not would never have impacted the Indians, because at that point it was all about the Indians, and the games were going to be sold out with or without the Browns. And I think what the Indians did was really fill a void much of the fall, because the Indians were always playing deep into October. And so I think, if nothing else, the Indians helped fill a void there for the people that had lost the Browns.
I feel exactly what you're saying, and I agree. Not the financial impact, but perhaps that's why the love affair became that much deeper, because at the same time you have one guy who in most people's eyes is betraying the town. You've got this other story, and they just truly enveloped around that team and just took them in, and I agree with you there, because you're right. 95, the Browns were still here. That was the last season before everything went upside down. And I want to talk to you now. We're into that era now, talking about the 94, 95, 96, 97. By the way, why did you choose, I'm just curious, I know you've explained this in other interviews, why did you choose to focus specifically only up until 1997 in this book?
Well, that was really Terry's call. And I think part of it had to do with the fact that things were changing after the 95 season. The Indians obviously went to the World Series in 95 and 97, and while they would continue to dominate and go to the playoffs in 98, 99, and 2001, I think at some point, if you want to get into the details that Terry wanted to get into with some of the players and those special moments, you had to draw a line there. Otherwise, you'd have a book that would be the size of a Bible. And I think the other point of it was that period was really when so much of the core was still together. And little by little, that core was leaving. And so was kind of the general feeling of that very unique group that lost together in the early 90s and then was dominant together in the mid-90s. Carlos Baerga had been traded. Albert Bell walked away on free agent during the free agent period. Kenny Lofton had been traded, and so you had a number of the faces changing, and I think it's twofold. That's part of it. Plus, you didn't go back to the World Series after '97, and I think Terry's feeling was at some point to do the detail that he wanted to do on certain stories and players, that you had to kind of put it into a time frame. And let's face it, I think even though the Indians came within 3 outs of winning the World Series in '97, I think if you talk to Indians fans, the 95 season is the one they'll always remember, even though that club lost in 6 games to Atlanta. I think people remember that team and that year probably more so than any season in maybe the last 50 years of Indians baseball.
I'll tell you, funny you mentioned that. Yesterday, Mike Brandenberry from DidTheTribeWinLastNight.com, him and I, our yesterday's show, we were, of course, the Browns quarterback deal this week, and he was like, you know what, J-Rock, I think the 95 Indians, they're more like Manziel. The 97 Indians, they're more like Hoyer. They're the blue collar, the hardware. The 95 has all the glitz and the glamour, and that was the team. And, that 95 team that you mentioned there, I mean, that 94 was the happy, it all kind of came together, and people were still getting used to having this park and this team and realizing what they could be. 95 was the year when Cleveland said, you know what, it's time to kick some sand in other people's faces instead of 40 years of having it done to us. And that team, that was a special team right there. Yesterday we mentioned it, even though they didn't finish the job. To me, I mean, I'm talking baseball history, I think 95 Indians go on the list of the all-time teams. I mean, I don't know where you put them, but that team was a fantastic team, even though some of the personalities led on the national level to it not being perhaps as feel-good of a story as it was for those of us here in Cleveland. Talk to me about the transition from 94 into that very special 95 season.
Well, I think we were the only market that wasn't impacted by the strike. As disappointing and as bitter as fans may have been to not see how far the Indians could take it in 94, Indians fans didn't remain bitter with the game of baseball like so many other people and communities did across America. And so they just couldn't wait for 95 to start whenever it was going to start. And, you know, the ball club and the fans kind of picked right up where they left off in August of 94. And so we were probably almost like Camelot compared to the rest of America when it came to the bitterness that the strike left with so many fans across America. We didn't have that here in Cleveland because people were just so gaga over their ball club and feeling like for the first time now in 40-some years, they had a chance to get to a World Series and to get to postseason. And so we were very fortunate that way, and the strike never did impact Cleveland like it did every other franchise. And so, you know, it was almost like we were living in a vacuum compared to everybody else. We were selling out. Other clubs were really struggling at the gate because of the fans' bitterness. And so it just took off. I mean, we, late in spring training, Mike Hargrove and John Hart and Danny O'Dowd decided, let's give Jose Mesa a chance to be the closer. He couldn't get it done as a starter, and the Indians didn't really have a bona fide closer late in that shortened spring training, and that was a huge gamble. I mean, people look at it now, and Mesa had one of the great seasons in the history of closers, but nobody could have envisioned that prior to the season, and it was just kind of the way that whole year went. Everything the Indians tried worked, and they won 100 games in a 144-game season. 27 of those 100 wins were last at bat, and I think that all helped perpetuate this great feeling fans had about the ball club. They literally went to the ballpark expecting a win every night and pretty much always saw the Indians win. Some way, somehow, they found a way to win. And, you know, when 27% of your victories are last-at-bat victories, you'll never have a season like that again. And they were the most entertaining offensive ball club, not only in baseball, but one of the most entertaining offensive ball clubs in the history of the game. Plus, that club could really pitch. So there was not a weakness anywhere to be found. And, you know, it almost became the perfect season with the exception of losing the World Series.
When I talk to people about those teams, and especially 95, I say, there's a difference between hoping to win or even, probably thinking you're going to win and literally expecting to win. When you don't win, that's the aberration, and that was how strong that 95 team was. And let me ask you, I touched on it just a second ago, Albert Bell, the mercurial personality of Albert Bell. A lot of people, and I'm curious your thoughts being in the mix, how much of this is hindsight and how much of this was really going on at the time. A lot of people think that the Indians Super Bowl run, let's try that again as I'm looking at my Twitter feed here. The Indians World Series run with the Braves that year, that the national media kind of soured on what should have been the feel-good story of the Indians because of personalities like Albert Bell. Do you agree with that or no?
Oh, yeah, I think that was, pretty evident. Once you have a team get to the World Series, you're going to be covered like you've never been covered before, and you're going to have people covering your team that have never covered it before. And, obviously Albert Bell went off on Hannah Storm prior to a ball game, and she was a national network personality, and because you did it in the way he did it against a female, that obviously didn't look good. But, in all honesty, I don't think anybody here in Cleveland gave a hoot what the national media thought. And, they were